Hello and welcome to the programme which looks at the Holy Land. I am Paul Calvert. Psalm 122 from the New King James Bible says this: Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. May they prosper who love you. I'm with Joshua Hasten, and we're talking about the violence that's happening at the moment in Israel. What's started this round of violence?
So what started this round of violence is basically the same thing that has started major rounds of violence over the last 100 years, and that is radicals, in this case within the Palestinian Authority, inciting to violence, claiming that the Jews were trying to storm Al-Aqsa Mosque. Of course, Al-Aqsa Mosque on the Temple Mount, which is Judaism's holiest site. So at the beginning of Ramadan, you had these false claims that the Jews were storming Al-Aqsa Mosque, storming the compound, trying to take over the Temple Mount, trying to take over Jerusalem, really, Judaize Jerusalem. So that's what led this off. There are many excuses used by the PA and others as to why this started. If you're talking about 4 homes in the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood, but that's not the real reason, and we can talk about that as well. Those are excuses used. This is incitement by the PA. This is incitement by Hamas, and right now Hamas is trying to show that they are the tough guys, so to speak, and that they're the best ones able to stand up against Israel, to attack Israel, to cause the most casualties, God forbid. So this is an internal conflict, really, between Hamas and the Palestinian Authority, and in this case, Hamas is winning by firing all these rockets. So, again, the biggest point I want to make is that this is a false accusation of Jews trying to storm Al-Aqsa, which is what really this is all about when it comes down to it.
We've seen pictures of what's happened up on the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Was this pre-planned? Was the violence pre-planned?
Well, again, I mean, you had images in specific cases where you actually saw that the so-called worshippers had brought up rocks and other weapons to the Al-Aqsa, knowing full well that the following day, as an example, that they would use those weapons against the Israeli security forces. But back about 3-4 weeks ago, at the beginning of Ramadan, you had here in Jerusalem what was called the TikTok competitions going on, where you had Arabs who were targeting ultra-Orthodox Jews or anyone who appeared to look Jewish, and then posting them on to the TikTok social media application. It's really a copycat of what was going on in New York, where Jews were being attacked there. So that kind of started it off, and then you had the claims that the Jews were desecrating Al-Aqsa. And this was the Palestinian Authority, they were supposed to have elections were canceled, and they have all these internal problems. And once they realized, we have all these issues, we have internal problems, we're going to have to cancel elections, they started blaming Israel for their problems. They started blaming Israel, saying Israel's not letting Jerusalem Arabs vote. They started saying that this case where you have 4, it's actually a landlord versus renter case with 4 families it's actually called the ancient Shimon HaTzadik neighborhood in Jerusalem, or Sheikh Jarrah. You had all these excuses as to why people were rioting. But again, at the end of the day, it's the Palestinian Authority trying to hold their control of power. It's Hamas saying, no, we're the ones who are in power, and it's an internal battle, and the Jews here are the scapegoat.
We've heard about Sheikh Jarrah. Whose is the land? What's happening there?
So this is land that belonged to Jewish families before 1948, and between 1948 and 1967, you actually had an illegal Jordanian occupation of areas in Jerusalem. It is known to some as the East Jerusalem. I call it the eastern neighborhoods of Jerusalem. So these were Jewish landowners here in the city. Following, again, between 48 and 67, Jordan had control of those areas, and then the Jews who owned that property went and reclaimed their rightful property. So you had essentially families who were squatting in those homes, not paying rent. They haven't paid rent in over 50 years. They're the ones who have been residing there. And really, this could have been just an internal situation where a landowner and tenants resolve their issues. You pay me rent and you can stay in these houses. It could have been that simple, but no. This was used as an excuse and a rallying call by the Arabs who turned Sheikh Jarrah into an international incident. In any other case in the world, have you ever seen an issue where you had 4 squatters actually make the front pages of all the major newspapers around the world? I mean, that's what it is. It's an internal issue between a landlord, a private issue between a landlord and his tenants who aren't paying rent. But anything that can ignite a fire That is what is being used time and time again by the Palestinian Authority, by the other terror organizations. And at the end of the day, they blame the Jews en masse. And that's why we've seen the riots in Jerusalem. That's why we've seen now it's up to over, I think it's 1,400 rockets fired over the last 3 days alone, which is unprecedented in all these years. And you have all these excuses along the way.
Is it sort of been created as the perfect storm with all these little elements that are happening?
Yeah, no doubt about it. I mean, you have Ramadan, which ironically is supposed to be a holy month of fasting and peace and reflection. And that's really what Ramadan is. And I myself participated in an iftar ceremony, the breaking of the fast at the end of Ramadan in Hebron, just a few weeks ago with a group of Jews and Arabs who actually were, were willing to meet and want to have true peace and coexistence with each other. But you had Ramadan, then you had Jerusalem Day. This Friday, I believe, is what's known as Al-Quds Day. It's essentially the Iranian Hate of Israel festival. And then you have what's known as the Nakba this coming Saturday, which goes back to 1948 when 6 Arab armies tried to wipe the new state of Israel off the face of the earth and failed to do so. So for them, they call it a catastrophe, and they mark that usually by carrying out violent demonstrations. So you have all these elements together, Ramadan, Jerusalem Day, plus the canceling of the elections within the Palestinian Authority, and that's really, all this coming together is what has made this round of violence particularly hostile, particularly aggressive. And again, now you have 1,400 rockets and counting with no end in sight.
What's it like living in the line of fire for these communities around the Gaza belt?
So I was down reporting yesterday on the border with Gaza, and it's unimaginable. I mean, the rockets actually have been going for 20 years now. In April 2001, the first rocket was fired at an Israeli community. This has been going on for 20 years. So in addition to the fact that people are actually being killed by these rockets, I think now 8 people have died in the last several days, been killed by these rockets. You have entire generations of children who are growing up who don't understand what kids in normal environments, what their reality is. In other words, kids in other countries around the world don't think twice when they go out to the park. Here you have kids who are born in the year 2001 are now 20 years old, and their entire lives, when they go outside to play, their mothers and fathers have to tell them, okay, make sure you know where the nearest shelter is. If you hear a red alert siren, then you have to run to the closest shelter. So they don't know what it's like. They don't know to them, that's normal, having to run to shelter. So they don't know what it's like to be real kids. You have so much post-traumatic stress disorder. I wouldn't even call it post-traumatic because it's still going on right now. It's not even post. It hasn't even gotten to the point of post. I heard a story when I was down there yesterday of a 3rd grader who's in diapers. You have kids who are having nightmares, wetting their beds, unwilling to sleep alone. They have to sleep with their parents, only sleeping in the protected rooms. This has traumatized an entire generation of kids. It's unacceptable, and it's gone on for way, way too long.
Now, Gaza's quite a long way from Jerusalem. Can a rocket hit Jerusalem? And what's the procedure if something happens now?
Well, in Jerusalem, you have about 1.5 minutes to 2 minutes to run for shelter. So, yes, rockets can hit Jerusalem. The other day, we had a rocket land in a community just outside the city of Jerusalem. The reports today of a rocket landing near the town of Eilat, the city of Eilat, which is on Israel's southern coast, I believe it's about 150 or so kilometers from Gaza, so very, very far away. So Hamas obviously has the capabilities at this point, most likely funded by Iran, to build these weapons, of firing essentially almost anywhere in the country. Yesterday you had rockets firing, and today also in the Tel Aviv region, as far north as Netanya. So now you're talking about 80, 100, 150 kilometers away. So Hamas has a vast arsenal of rockets. They can use them if they want to. Perhaps they're not directing as many to this area towards Jerusalem because of the fact that, you do have a sizable Arab population here in Jerusalem. But again, I wouldn't put it past them. In the war in 2014, there were rockets in Jerusalem. There were rockets in the Bethlehem area. So it is very possible that you could get a siren here. It is not out of the realm that they'll target Jerusalem as well.
Now you have the Iron Dome that brings down rockets. Tell us a bit about what is the Iron Dome.
So the Iron Dome is one of Israel's anti-missile defense systems, and you have these batteries of these anti-missile missiles which shoot these rockets out of the sky, and the rate of success of the Iron Dome is over 90%. So when an Iron Dome missile is shot, 9 out of 10 times it strikes its target, destroys the rocket before it can land and cause damage. A lot of times the Iron Dome, the technology is so good that those who are manning the Iron Dome system will know if a rocket being fired by Hamas or another terror group in Gaza, if it's headed for an open field, then the Iron Dome crew will decide not to launch a rocket in order to intercept that missile because they know it won't do any harm. That's how advanced the technology is. But again, it's over 90% effective. Unfortunately, and I'm looking now on my phone now as the towns of Sderot right now, as you're interviewing me, are being bombarded with rockets, and other towns in southern Israel. Unfortunately, you only have a limited number of those rockets, and with heavy barrages where we're seeing over 100 an hour, it's nearly impossible to intercept each and every rocket, and that's why we've had several casualties. Unfortunately, now 8 people have been killed since Monday as a result of the rockets.
How much does it cost to launch one of these rockets, to bring a rocket down?
I don't know the exact cost, but it's thousands of dollars per rocket. These anti-rocket missiles or anti-missile missiles. I don't have the exact cost. I did read it the other day. I don't remember exactly what it is. I could be mistaken. I think it's $20-something thousand per missile launch. Wow. If I'm not mistaken, it's definitely very, very expensive. But, that's if you want to save lives, then you're going to be using these anti-missile missiles, the Iron Dome. You're interviewing me, so I guess you're kind of quoting me on that. But I would have to double check that. But I believe it's over $20,000 every single time they push the button to try to intercept a missile from Gaza.
Now, if Hamas send a great barrage of rockets like those 130 they claim that they'd sent over to Tel Aviv, can the Iron Dome cope with a lot of rockets?
Yeah, I think that's the issue. I don't know if it can cope with so many rockets, but again, it's extremely pinpointed. So I think that they try their best to target those rockets which are headed for the most heavily populated areas, rockets which are directly headed towards the cities. But to answer your question, I think it's impossible. I mean, we've seen direct hits in Rishon LeZion and in Ashdod and in Ashkelon and in other towns. So, I would say that unfortunately the proof is in the pudding. It does not take down each and every rocket, even if it is aimed for a specific population center. They are definitely doing their best. They have the best job they can. They're absolute heroes, the crews who are working 24/7 to man those anti-missile systems, in addition to the IDF soldiers in general. Again, as I said, I was down there yesterday, and there was an alert on the border. There was a possible infiltration. I personally saw the troops put on their gear, head towards the border of Gaza, just half a kilometer away, and start looking for a potential infiltration. Unfortunately, in this case, the warning that they had received turned out to be Hamas preparing to fire an anti-tank missile at soldiers, and one soldier, unfortunately, was killed in a jeep very, very close to the Gaza border. That was the threat, and that was the warning, which unfortunately was misdiagnosed or misread yesterday. But I saw it for myself as the soldiers prepared to go into battle, potentially against Hamas terrorists. We've seen over the years the Hamas smuggling tunnels, the terrorists popping up in Israeli territory. So that is still a potential threat, even though we've built systems, underground systems, to detect. You never know when somebody will get through, either underground or by the Mediterranean Sea into Israel, and try, God forbid, but try to infiltrate an Israeli community. It is possible.
So are Hamas learning that there's a weakness within the Iron Dome system, or does Israel just need to place more Iron Domes in that area?
Well, I think it's a bigger question than that. I think it's an ultimate question of what Israel is going to do. We've gone to war already 3 times, in 2009, 2012, 2014, and while this isn't officially a war at this point, it's an operation, the real question is what can Israel do in order to rid itself of the terror threat from Gaza. Israel in 2005 made a huge mistake, in my opinion, pulled 10,000 Jewish residents and the entire army, which was stationed in Gaza, out of the Gaza Strip. They were in the communities of Gush Katif. They pulled everybody out for hopefully peace. And what happened, eventually Hamas took over the area, turned those former communities into rocket launching pads. In addition, they, of course, launch rockets from inside mosques, from inside schools, from inside UN compounds. So I think the bigger question really should be, is what is Israel going to do eventually? How many different times are we going to get into the situation where they fire hundreds of rockets, in this case thousands of rockets, and then we come to an internationally brokered ceasefire after a few days, and then 6 months to a year later, Hamas starts up again. So we really have to come up with a solution. I know it's difficult, but there needs to be an ultimate solution so that we don't keep going into the cycle of ridiculousness, I would call it. It's not a cycle of violence, by the way, because they are the aggressors. We are defending ourselves. But we have to put an end to it once and for all.
Now, you've already just mentioned that rockets have been fired into Sderot. How do you know?
Well, I have on my phone, I'm looking at it right now as it's going off. As we are speaking, it is going off with rockets being launched into 6-7 different communities along the Gaza border. So there is a technological system which tracks the rockets, and those residents who live within several kilometers of the Gaza border have about 15 seconds to run to the nearest shelter. And here's another one going off in another community in the south. It's literally going on as we are speaking.
So this is an app you have on your phone?
It's an app I have on my phone, and those residents are hearing it, in the community or city systems. They have these red alert warning sirens in each individual community. And it's very highly technological. So if certain communities are not being targeted, the system doesn't go off. And communities that are being targeted, they do hear a red alert system. But some of the communities, I've personally been in situations where you only hear the alert after the rocket's already landed. Those communities which are less than a kilometer away from the border, in some cases you have 10 seconds or less to seek shelter. I've been in that situation many times as a reporter down in southern Israel, and as somebody who used to work I personally worked in Sderot for 3 years, even before the Iron Dome was created. So I'm talking about the years 2007 to 2009. I was doing public relations work for an organization down there, and there you had no Iron Dome. So you had 15 seconds, and there was no option of Iron Dome knocking missiles out of the sky. You just really had to run. You had to run, and I've seen situations where people have not made it to the shelters, and it's frightening.
Now, if Christians want to pray, what's the app called so that when the rockets are being fired, they can actually start praying straight away when they know rockets have been fired? What's the app called?
So the app, let me see what it is, because I have it in Hebrew. It's called, in Hebrew, Tseva Adom, or Red Alert. You can download it. I have an iPhone. You can download the Red Alert app, and if you are really daring, I guess, or wanting to lose a lot of sleep, if you keep that red alert, if you keep the notifications on wherever you are in the world, and you put that by your bed and leave it on, as we have done before in solidarity with the residents of the South, you'll hear every single time a rocket is fired and every time an alert goes off. And the way things have been the last few days, you're talking about hundreds of alerts. People are not sleeping. It's all night long. It's all day long. And, schools are closed. You have 1.5 million Israeli children who are not in school today as a result of the situation. They've just given them the week off. There's a Jewish holiday next week, Shavuot. So they've decided to close schools until after Shavuot. So that's where we are right now, folks. So, we could use all the prayers we can get from everyone around the world who cares about the peace, the true peace of Jerusalem. So please pray for us, and let's hope for the best. Let's hope for good news.
Do you fear a ground invasion?
I really hope not. I can't tell you what the higher-ups in the IDF are thinking, but I really personally do not want to see boots on the ground in Gaza, and that is because of the reality. I think that boots on the ground in Gaza would actually be the IDF and Israel fighting so that Mahmoud Abbas and the PA would replace Hamas. In other words, I don't want Israeli soldiers losing their lives just so another corrupt a group of goons, another corrupt regime like the Palestinian Authority would then go in and take over Gaza. They did control Gaza from 2005 to 2007 until Hamas took over in a bloody coup. But I do not want to see IDF soldiers sacrificing their lives. If you told me that Israel's plan was to go in and reestablish Jewish communities in Gaza, take over Gaza entirely, that's a different situation, but I don't think anybody's talking about that right now. I think we have to take different measures, take creative measures in order to prevent having to send ground troops in, and I think it can be done. We are the startup nation, right, folks? We can come up with creative solutions to stop this problem. It's been way, way too long. 20 years is 20 years too long, and it has to stop immediately.
If they did go into ground invasion, would this be a possibility of you being called up personally?
No, I personally would not. I arrived in Israel at the age of 26, and while I pleaded to try to join the IDF, they told me I was too old, believe it or not, and I was in great shape. I actually got, this is actually a funny story, I got what is equivalent to a cease and desist letter from the IDF, because I went in, I got called in originally. When I moved to this country, I did a full day in the IDF recruitment office in Jerusalem. And at the end of the day, they sat down, they took a look at how old I was, and they said, don't call us, we'll call you. So I didn't accept that answer. And I came back 2 weeks later without an appointment, literally walked past the secretary of the person in charge, went up to his office on the 4th floor, sat down in front of him, and I said, take me. And he was very upset. I didn't have an appointment. I literally walked past the secretary. A week or two later in the mail, I basically got what is a cease and desist. Do not try that again. Do not bother us. So I personally will not be called up, but I have many family members who are right now actively members of the IDF who are serving. I have one family member who is stationed today, as we're speaking, a half a kilometer from the Gaza border. So, and again, I went and I visited this person yesterday, so I know what he's going through and what the troops are going through down there, putting the safety of the entire country before their own personal safety. The brave men and women of the IDF, and we thank them with all of our hearts, and your listeners should please pray for their well-being as well.
What's your prayer, finally, for the nation at this moment, at this difficult time?
My prayer is that there will be no more injuries, no more casualties, no more deaths, that we will return to quiet very, very soon, but it has to be a true peace. It cannot be a peace where Hamas still has the capabilities of firing again in just a couple of months. Israel has to say once and for all, that's it. Hamas has to go, and if we're already on the subject, the Palestinian Authority, which is also a group of corrupt terrorists, formerly known as the PLO, they have to go as well. These leaders do not have the interests of their own people in mind. The PA and Hamas are bad for the Arabs who live under their control. There's no freedom of journalism. Minorities are discriminated against. Women are treated like garbage. They're just really bad societies. And again, I mentioned a few minutes ago, I was at an actual iftar with Jews and Muslims who are willing to work together from the ground up, who can't stand the Palestinian Authority, who recognize the fact, they may not be Zionists, but they recognize the fact that Israel's here to stay, and they're willing to work with Israelis. So that is in a dream scenario. That's the way I wish things would be.
Okay, Joshua, thank you very much.
Thanks so much.
Thank you for joining us today. Pray that God will move by his mighty power in the Holy Land and bring his peace.